I'm going to move my fish into this slightly larger tank. It's a 2 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, and I'll be storing away the smaller tank because I only just want the one tank. It's still on the small side, but it's just slightly larger and it's just the right size for small fish in my flat. I'm not a fan of really large tanks, especially when you live in a flat, so I think this is just the right size. Now this comes with a filter and it has all these expensive replacement cartridges which I won't be using, plus I really want a deep substrate so this filter won't fit. It comes with a heater which I'll be using in the cycling process because I want to set the temperature to 28 degrees Celsius, and according to a scientific journal 28 degrees centigrade is the best temperature for growing nitrifying bacteria really quickly. It shows a picture of 2 LEDs including a plant LED which isn't in the box. It just has the normal LED, but that's okay, I'll just be using the normal LED. So I filled the tank with topsoil from Wickes, and it was just £3.50 for a big 10-litre bag, and I've put about a third of that in here and mixed it with some distilled water, and then just evened it out with a old Oyster card, and then I put a border of black Aquarium gravel around the edge because I don't want any of the algae. And I've got about, say, 2.5 inches, and now I'm going to put a net in. So I've got from this cover, I've cut it to size by following the box. We'll put that over the top so the roots can still go through, but it will keep the soil in place a bit more. Obviously some of it will dissolve and the smaller particles will pass through, but it will help a bit. And then I will get some black aquarium sand which I will wash thoroughly and cap this soil off. And then I will leave it to settle for about 2 weeks, test the water a few times, and if it's okay I'll introduce some fish. A piece of netting which I got from an old cot mattress cover. You could use curtain or anything like that, something inert that won't interfere with the water. And I've just cut the corners so they don't, and I've cut a bit off the front so it doesn't show. And now I'm going to cap this with about 2 inches of sand, black sand. So I've capped the soil off with 1 inch of black sand, and the sand is quite big, so any of the detritus or the fish poo can filter down into the soil and be nitrified or broken down. I've used a window squeegee just to even out the cap. I know some people like it wavy and slanted at the back, but I'm going to keep this a flat tank, and I'll just even it out a bit with that window squeegee. It's hair grass, some Java fern, I've got some rotala and some bacopa, however you want to pronounce that, and I'm going to transfer that in there with a pair of tweezers. Now at first I found it really difficult. You just kind of push it in, and then while loosen it slightly and wiggle it to release, and then pull out smoothly, and it usually stays put. So I've taken them out of the pot and eased them apart really gently, being careful not to chop the roots off, and I'll just grab it about there. Just push in and the sand should grip it. If your gravel is quite thick, it probably won't grip as easily. I've used a small bowl to break the force of the water when I pour it in, and after I did this I discovered the bubble wrap. I put the Pat Mini Aqua in, and I've diverted the water upwards to create some surface agitation. If you're wondering why the water's pink, that's because of the plant light, and I'll be removing the plant light as I don't think it's necessary, and I don't like the pink colour. And I think just a normal LED will do. And it's very cloudy because there's still small particles from, I think, the sand and maybe a bacterial bloom, I'm not sure. But I'm going to keep doing water changes and I will document that. Ammonia is high, nitrite is high. I'm not going to do it in fish cycling as I'm waiting for those to come down once I've established some bacteria. Now these test strips aren't very accurate. I don't know if that's because they're getting quite old, but there's a trick. If you do like these, you can trim them into 3 parts and that will serve as 3 separate tests. Save a bit of money there. But I think I want to invest in an API liquid master test kit instead. It'd be quite hard to chop that into another piece, but I can try. Let's give it a go. Yeah, got the first one. 3 strips instead of 1. Checking for nitrites. We're about 10 days into the cycle of the new tank, and we're about 2 parts per million as per the tube on the right, the purple tube. And in my old tank I've got 0 parts per million nitrite, which is a cycle tank. In my new tank, it's a 2-foot tank, about 60 litres. This is my old tank, which has a really deep sand substrate. That's about half the size, and that has 0 nitrites, which is cycled. And they've got some cardinal tetras, some harlequin guppies, and some amano shrimp. And I don't clean the substrate, I just let that filter into the bottom where anaerobic bacteria breaks it down. And yes, there are 0 nitrites in this tank, and I do not change the water on this tank. I'm going to dilute this hydrogen peroxide to sterilize these plants, just in case there are any snail eggs or anything like that. But before I do that, I'll measure some out with this measuring tape, and then I've got some fishing line just to wrap some of this riccia around it. Maybe I should leave it as a floating plant, but I think I'll try and wrap it around. So I've just diluted some hydrogen peroxide here, and I've dipped all my plants. I'm wrapping this around the rock. I'm not sure how this riccia fluitans will do, as I don't have any CO2 yet, but I'm thinking of getting some. I've just tied it around with some fishing line. Amano shrimp are hard at work eating all that algae off the leaves. They'll clean that up in no time. Takashi Amano made these shrimp famous as he used them in all of his tanks to clean any algae and keep them looking really clean. There's some diatom algae growing all over the hair grass, and I think the shrimp will get rid of those. The nitrite level is still a bit too high, and the nitrate is also too high. Just waiting for that to come down, and I will add fish later. Put some green hair algae there, but the shrimp and the otocinclus will take care of that once I put them in. A heater helps speed up the growth of beneficial bacteria, and I wish I had put this in straight away. And maybe I should have started off with CO2. CO2 will discourage the growth of algae and encourage the growth of your plants. Most plants will not need additional CO2, but some plants will. In the background I have some plants that are quite temperamental to new changes, so I will add some DIY CO2 so it's relatively low cost. I'm going to use the citric acid and baking soda as opposed to the yeast and sugar DIY method. There's a lot of algae here, but I think the amano shrimp and the otocinclus will take care of this. The fish look happier in this tank and have started schooling. I'm not sure about this ram, but it looks ill with the red blotch on its stomach. It may be a parasite. I hope the ram will live, but I don't think it will live for very long. I've put my fish into this little Tupperware just to drip acclimate them over about half an hour. The otocinclus and the amano shrimp are at work eating all the algae. I might help them remove some of this by hand. I think they should do quite a good job taking care of all these algae. The otocinclus, my favourite algae eater, and you can see it very busy fixing this cryptocorn that is heavily coated in algae. This is my plan for my DIY CO2 system. So the diffuser into the tank with a steel tube that goes over the edge and then into a bubble counter. I may move that bubble counter nearer to the DIY system. Then I check valve so water cannot backflow into the solenoid valve. The solenoid valve will be connected via some tubing into the CO2 output from the DIY system. It's all powered by this 12-volt power supply. I'm going to use two 1.5 litre Coca-Cola bottles. These balls are heavy so that they sink into the solution, and some check valves are in place so that fluid and gases flow in the right direction. I will use a drop checker to ensure that there is not too much or too little CO2 in the tank. Green usually means that there is the right amount, blue means there's not enough, and yellow means there's too much. 15 drops as per the instructions. Flip it over and stick it into the tank. Ensure it's tight so it doesn't leak into the aquarium water column. I've added some stone and some hachet fish. The riccia is starting to die back, but some parts are regrowing. The crypts are a nice colour. The rotala and bacopa are doing well. And here is my CO2 system. The bubble counter shows 1 bubble per 2 seconds as recommended for a 2-foot tank.